What would you say to a parent about how to help a child be that angry, but also know somewhere that they have the other side?
Well, I think partly it's what Gordon says, is that you have to acknowledge in yourself and grant yourself the right to have all these negative feelings, yourself, so-called negative feelings. Just give yourself the right to have them, without giving yourself the right to act them out. But just accept that they're in you, they're a part of you. As to the child, you need to also validate when they have such feelings. And say, yeah,
Yes.
you're very angry with mommy right now. You'd love to go outside and play, but I can't let you right now because it's 20 below, whatever it is. But there's no reason why a child shouldn't be angry. So we have to actually allow and make space for the child's upset feelings without making the child wrong for it.
It's interesting, though, you can do that with your words, but if you're not really doing it, the kid knows.
No, and absolutely, and communication takes place on two levels.
Yeah.
There's the verbal communication, then there's the body language communication.
And what's going on for you.
And what's going on internally, and I'll say more about that tomorrow, but certainly it's that level of non-verbal communication that actually sends the real message, not the words that we're using. So we not only have to say that we're okay with your anger, we have to be okay with their anger. And if we're not, and the people whose parents were not okay with their anger, I would used to meet them in the palliative care ward with cancer. Because the repression of anger is, I'm telling you, the major risk factor for cancer. Not that most physicians would even know what I'm talking about, but that's another issue. But that non-acceptance of the child's dark side is one of the biggest wounds actually that we can inflict on the child.
What if I told you that repressing your child's anger could have lifelong consequences, ones you wouldn't even expect? As parents, we want our kids to be happy, kind, and well-adjusted. But what happens when they explode with rage? When they scream, stomp, and lash out? Our instinct might be to shut it down. Stop crying. Calm down. Don't be so dramatic. But here's the shocking truth. Suppressing a child's emotions, especially anger, can lead to deeper wounds than we realize. Children don't just get over their emotions. They internalize them. And if they're taught that anger is unacceptable, they don't stop feeling it, they just learn to bury it. The problem? That buried anger doesn't disappear. It festers. It turns into self-doubt, anxiety, even physical illnesses later in life. Studies show that suppressed anger is linked to higher risks of chronic disease and even cancer. So what can we do instead? The answer is surprisingly simple. Allow the anger to exist. Give it a name. You're really mad at mommy right now, aren't you? You're upset because you wanted to play outside, but it's too cold. Validating your child's feelings doesn't mean encouraging bad behavior. It means showing them that emotions are natural and manageable. It teaches them emotional balance. And here's the kicker. Kids don't learn from what we say. They learn from what we do. If we're uncomfortable with anger, our own or theirs, they can sense it. So the first step? Acknowledge your own emotions. Make peace with your own anger. Only then can we guide them through theirs. This isn't about raising kids who never get angry. It's about raising kids who know that anger is just one part of the human experience, and that within every storm, there's always a calm. Want to know how to put this into action? Stick around, because in the next few minutes, we're diving into practical ways to help kids navigate their emotions without fear, without guilt, and without shame.
Yeah, it seems to me that until you can kind of accept your own dark side, it's hard to.
Yeah, and then you have to accept.
When you see your child suffering, you don't want it. You don't want to suffer. It's really about you suffering, because you don't want them to suffer. It makes you suffer.
We can't really invite in someone else something that we have not invited to exist in ourselves. But we can't really give a full invitation to a child to exist in our presence unless we accept all the emotions that come with that, in them and in us. If I can't accept an emotion that my child stirs up in me, then I'm not able to accept that child. And part of the problem, and as we try to sanitize our feelings, as we try to have children who are just simply happy and kind and considerate, is that they lose the vitality, they lose the passion. They need all of that spectrum, and we call them negative feelings. They're not negative feelings. They're how we're stirred up. The brain always has its reasons, and it's there. It's better if opposite feelings marry each other. And if they can marry each other, if they can come in this, we can find our way through in the middle. And that's where we are more civilized. So a large part of it is just taking an accepting attitude towards our own mixed feelings and our children's mixed feelings, not being afraid of them.
So you see a child attending to another child who's upset, or you see a child attend to an animal who's in need. Tell me what we should be doing, because what I think I just heard you say is, if we say, you know, that was lovely the way you were with that little dog, that there's another way that we could be coming at that.
So much so. One of the big questions I get often, and I have got through the years, is how do you help children to get, as siblings, to get along? Yeah. How do you help them act kind and caring to each other? And we're so busy trying to get them to be friends, we don't understand where caring comes from. If we just understood the hierarchical nature of attachment, that when you do the matchmaking for them to draw out the alpha instincts in one, just like a 2-year-old and little baby doll. Oh, you know, that baby's so lucky to have you. Look at her. She, you know, you're just so good for her, and you get that wonderful alpha presence to take care of, to care for. And so caring is natural to hierarchically organized attachment. But what we've tried to do in our society is flatline all those attachments. Same age, same grade, the siblings to do so. And we don't realize that caring is not natural to that particular thing. Caring comes out best. That's why you see it, and why in play you have this in terms of taking care of dolls, the younger, the pet, and so on. The caring is just phenomenal. But it is a hierarchically arranged emotion for the most part until we get older and can reciprocate in this. But for children, it's very much of a hierarchically arranged emotion.
How do you understand that hierarchically arranged emotion?
Well, just to reinforce that, I was looking in preparation for tomorrow's talk, I was looking at a study of bonobos, which are great apes. They're sort of a smaller chimpanzee. And they're very close to human beings, really. I don't know if you realize this, but I think something like our DNA is only about 1% different from chimpanzees. Next time you think you're so great, you know.
They're
anyway,
pretty great,
they were looked at consoling behavior among bonobos. These immature children, you know, young bonobos, consoling others, comforting them,
yeah,
being hurt or upset or scared, and they'd actually do this. These immature but child or youth, adolescent bonobos will engage in consoling, caring behavior. But it's the ones who are being brought up close to their mothers who are most likely to engage in that kind of behavior. So again, it's that hierarchical transmission of caring that Gordon's talking about.
Do you want to explain that a little bit more, what you mean by hierarchical?
Well, the attachments all the attachment instincts are to arrange us in a way to either care for or to be taken care of, because that's the purpose of it. Our survival depends upon our togetherness, and our togetherness is arranged so that one takes care of the other. So in identical twins, when they get attached, the attachment brain doesn't quite know what to do, and so it will evoke a set of alpha instincts in one and a set of dependent instincts in another, creating an alpha personality and a dependent personality. For those of you that follow hockey, you can think of the Sedin twins here. and that's and it can follow them through life. Now, ideally, it would be reciprocated, like in an ideal marriage, that at any one given time, one is taking care of the other, but over time, they both take care of each other. There has to be a lead in the dance and a follow. And because we've been so blinded, especially in Canada and in Western civilization, by the outcome, the final outcome, which is equality. We don't realize that the most important dynamic is all hierarchical. And if we actually took more care this way with our children in our schools, caring would be absolutely spontaneous and natural. But we keep on trying to get those who are equal to care for each other what brings out the caring is when you feel as if you're the answer to another. And that is that kind of hierarchical thing. So it became the theme of the book, Hold On to Your Kids, which was about the flatlining of this. And with the flatlining is the loss of a natural kind of dance that brings out the best in us in terms of caring and empathy is concerned.
One of the things that I've observed that always gives me actually pain is when I hear people describe teenagers and describe them as if they're crazy and bad and just hold your breath while they get through this phase. Don't worry. Parents start talking about that when their kids are 3 and 4. They start worrying about when their kids become teenagers. And it is true that those are some challenging times for parents. But what do you say about attachment and about allowing a child to be their full person during that phase? What's the importance of that, and how do we do that?
Well, there is a greater load on the teenage brain. Consciousness comes largely developmentally in 3 parts. A second part, the lights go on about 5 years of age, but there's still huge limits in terms of the amount of consciousness. It's really not hypothetical. It's really not reflective fully until puberty. And what happens is the amount at puberty that becomes accessible to consciousness means that there's all this raw material to integrate, to be able to pair up and to be in the middle of. And so you get an impulsiveness post-pubescent for about a couple of years that looks very much like a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, just because of the load on the brain. It's not that they're regressing, but if there is room for, if the bottom line is not behavior, if the bottom line is really the relationship, I'm able to communicate to that adolescent, that invitation to exist in my presence despite the problems with attitude, behavior, and so on, and I can really, the relationship is the bottom line. Given that containment, there's a lot more room for the child, for the adolescent, to be able to come in the middle of their mixed feelings. And boy, does it make a big difference if there is a couple of years of work of prefrontal cortex growth, especially prepubescent. You see the fruit of that really beginning to emerge in the 15 and 16 and 17-year-old. However, if it doesn't get to do that work, you get this huge pendulum swing, this polarized reactions, black and white thinking that can last for a lifetime.
This is where the parent comes into it, because the parent has to make room for those fluctuations and that impulsivity and that acting out. Now, what happens to us is, number one, we feel threatened at this point. And sometimes kids are far more intellectually capable than they are emotionally capable.
Yes. Absolutely.
Then we engage with their intellects and we think they should be able to understand all this stuff. And then there's a huge gap between their intellectual level.
Well, if you knew better, you should be able to behave better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is true for ourselves too, but we don't look at that too closely. So we feel threatened and we feel upset and then we want to fix it or control it. Secondly, parents are stressed. And this is where, if there's grandparents around who've seen this all before, and they have a tolerant attitude towards it, they can act as a buffer. But again, we tend to parent in an isolated fashion and in a very stressed kind of fashion. So there just isn't a container. And also, cultures, until very recently, used to have initiation processes, tribal ceremonial initiation processes, where adolescents were actually, in the case of Aboriginal Canadian nations, sometimes that were taken out into the woods on their own, and then they're given a task to find themselves, or sometimes very difficult circumstances, but it was all under the guidance of wise elders. All that's gone, so that the initiation to the adult world either has totally atrophied or has become kind of a vestige, such as the Jewish bar mitzvah ceremony, which is no longer a real initiation at all. It's more like a vestige of one. And so in the absence of that, then kids are left to be initiated into the world by their peers. And a lot of that initiation has got all the vices that you might expect from, immaturity, aggression, substance use, rejection of the adult values and all that. So there's a whole lot of cultural reasons why the natural process that Gordon talks about, which could be contained and directed, actually can take on very negative proportions, very negative dimensions in our society.
Let's pretend we have this opportunity here. We have this child who's going to be born, or the child's already born. Where do we start the story of okay.
No, you got to start before then.
Okay, so this is what I want to know. Where do we start the story of helping, I'm going to say the word teaching, but cultivating caring?
Yes.
So here's what's frightening. What's frightening is you can do an interview with a non-parent about the nature of his or her attachment relationships as a child. This is before they get their parents. And how they do it in that interview will predict how their unconceived child will fare at 1 year of age on attachment experiments. So it's like almost you don't know where to begin.
Because then their parents.
Because then their parents and so on. But if you're going to start somewhere,
yeah.
if you're going to name a starting point.
What's your starting point?
I would say you got to start at the first prenatal visit, which should be not just about blood tests and ultrasounds and immunizations and pap smears, but about how are you feeling in life about yourself? How's your relationship with the father of this child? What's happening for you? So that, because already the stresses on the woman during pregnancy will have an impact on the child's development.
In what way?
Well, in all kinds of ways, neurologically and hormonally and so on. How they handle stress and all that. So if you have to start somewhere, then I'd say start at the first prenatal visit at the very least, and start helping those parents explore their own emotional states in preparation for bringing a child into the world.
Doesn't that seem like obvious? I mean, why don't we as a culture just do that?
Well, you may see it sounds obvious, but nobody in medical school talks about it, and no doctor does it. And it just doesn't happen. It might happen, well, it just doesn't happen. Where would you start?
I'd like to start from a theoretical point here, first of all, and then bring it back to a practical. And the theoretical one is one of Charles Darwin's observations, which I think most people missed at that time. He said it was incredible that humans, first of all, we share emotion with all other mammals. Now we know about the limbic system, the emotional brain. And we do share emotion with all other mammals. But humans have the capability of feeling their emotions. And it turns out that feeling our emotions is very necessary, especially for caring. And we hear so many kids these days say, I don't care, doesn't matter, whatever. These are the same kids that don't say, I miss. These are the same kids who don't say, my feelings got hurt. These are the same kids that aren't saying, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm afraid. These are the same kids that research says to us, I've lost their blush when they're embarrassed.
What does that mean?
They no
Really
longer
lost it?
blush when they're embarrassed. They've lost it. In other words, they've lost the tender feelings. The point is here is for us to be able to feel our emotions, or we could call it a soft heart, being able to feel our emotions. We must not have become equipped for a wounding environment. And that is exactly what I see happening with children today. It's not that children haven't learned caring. It's that many of them care deeply at 2 years of age and 3 years of age, and they lost their feelings, their tender feelings. And the reason is, and it appears that more and more children are losing their feelings, along with losing their caring, their embarrassment, their nervousness, because it turns out the brain is equipped to be able to defend us against a vulnerability that's too much to bear. So if our feelings are getting hurt too much, the feelings go back into emotion, into the unconscious, rather than something that we're aware of, especially, again, the tender feelings. That allows us, when I was working with the kids in the prison system, it was amazing. They could eat and digest their food. They could sleep, many of them like babies. And they could concentrate. Most of it was how to get out of prison, but they could still concentrate. When I was there, I couldn't eat. I was sleepless, and I couldn't concentrate. I was rattled. They were equipped to function in a wounding environment like many of today's kids are at school, but at a great cost. These kids, when I did my straw research with them, they had 80% less feeling than other kids. They had lost their feelings. And that, to me, is the most significant issue. Not that kids have not been taught to be caring and considerate. It is that we're living in a world where children are losing their feelings. We're so busy trying to figure out what diagnosis they fit in and what the behavior problems and how to shape behavior. We don't even understand that they've lost this capacity that makes us fully human and humane, that we feel. And along with feeling is our hurt feelings, our missing feelings, and they're all part of the picture.
All right, so this really hit me. Like, really hit me. Because I've thought about this before, how we become who we are, where it all starts. But I never considered just how early it begins. Before birth? Before conception? The idea that a person's attachment style can be predicted before their parents even become parents? That's wild. And honestly, kind of terrifying. And it makes me think, where would I start this story? If we're talking about raising a child who feels safe, who cares, who doesn't shut down emotionally, where does that actually begin? Because I always assumed it starts at birth, maybe even during pregnancy. But now I'm realizing it starts before that. And that's a little overwhelming, isn't it? Because if the emotional state of a future parent already shapes the life of a child they haven't even had yet, then we're not just talking about parenting skills. We're talking about everything: mental health, relationships, stress, self-worth. And we don't really prepare for that. No one sits you down and says, hey, before you even think about having a kid, let's check in on your emotional world. But maybe they should. I mean, think about it. The first prenatal visit is all tests and screenings, making sure everything is physically okay. But what about emotionally? What if, along with checking blood pressure, doctors asked, how are you feeling? How's your relationship? What's weighing on you? Because stress, trauma, emotional wounds, those don't just stay locked inside the parent. They spill over. They shape the child before they're even born. And then there's this other part that really gets me. The fact that kids today aren't just struggling with behavior or attention or whatever diagnosis we throw at them. They're struggling to feel. Like, literally. They don't say, I miss you. They don't say, that hurt my feelings. And it's not because they don't want to. It's because at some point, Their brains decided those feelings were too much to handle. So they shut down. They go numb. And that just breaks my heart. Because I've seen it. I've felt it. I know what it's like to go from being open and feeling everything to suddenly realizing it's safer not to. It's easier to just say, I don't care. But that's the thing. When you lose the ability to feel the hard stuff, hurt, sadness, fear, you also lose the ability to feel the good stuff. Love, connection, joy. You can't just pick and choose. And now I'm thinking, how many kids are growing up this way? How many of us already did? And what would change if we actually paid attention before it got to that point? I don't have the perfect answer. But if we have to start somewhere, maybe it's there.
How do we create or develop a relationship that is going to cultivate caring?
Well, two thoughts come to mind, the two parts to your question. First of all, I think to appreciate and understand that separation is the most wounding experience for a child, the most stressful, the most impactful. And this is what the brain has to equip to live in a wounding environment, is separation. And because we put behavior as being more important, we have drifted into dreadful parenting habits, using separation-based discipline to try and manage our children's behavior. Instead of understanding, even with the Ferber method, it's using separation. You say, no, that's all now. We close the door, no more going pee, no more glasses of water. That's it. And we push the child's face into separation, which is a very wounding kind of thing. Withdraw the invitation for the child to exist in our presence until they behave. We euphemize that as time out. Or we take what a child cares about and we use it against them, and we euphemize that as consequences. And so we're using separation-based discipline, and then we wonder why we have children who lose their caring. So first of all, we have to go back and say, children are vulnerable. They are easily hurt. We want to preserve their feelings, their emotions, their ability to feel their emotions. That this is more important than performance and behavior, because if you have a child that has a soft heart, that can feel all the emotions, you're giving the raw material for the brain to do its work, to develop, and again to realize our human potential. The rest will unfold. And so those feelings are very important. But the way to preserve this, interesting enough, the way to preserve this, the single most important factor of being able to keep a child's heart soft is for us to have our child's heart in the first place. Is that if a child becomes emotionally attached to us, they give us their hearts. Most children will so if everything is going well by 5 years of age. The more that we matter to them, the less wounded they are by outside wounds. And so the resilience research says that this is one of the most significant ways we can actually shield a child in a wounding world. Now, some of us feel like we want to head for the hills, but there's no hills to head for anymore. To get away from what's happening, we see the wounding that happens on Facebook, on the internet now, and all of these things. And how in the world do you keep your children safe? And by this, I mean keep their hearts soft. And the heart, and again, the key is in the relationship. It's not in the teaching, interesting enough. It's not in the teaching. It's not even in the value transmission, because caring is so instinctive and spontaneous. They will care. It's not even in the value transmission. It's not a moral thing. It is in the softness of the heart, which we need to treasure. And a child who really believes in that there is that invitation to exist in our presence, and where the attachment goes deep, we have the greatest chance of being able to preserve that wonderful potential to become all that they were meant to be.
You know, the question of being protected in a wounding environment, I was very moved today. Somebody sent me a video, a YouTube video, of a woman who actually died last week. She was 110 years old, and she was thought to be the world's oldest Holocaust survivor. And she, a Jewish woman from, I'm not sure which Eastern European country, Austria perhaps. Anyway, she ended up in Theresienstadt, which is one of the concentration camps where now Czechoslovakia is. And she's one of these people that maintained her love of life throughout that horrible experience. And she connected with music. She was a wonderful pianist. And she played Chopin. So she played Chopin at the concentration camp, and when she wasn't playing it, she was thinking it. And she lived on her own till she was 110 years old and died quite unexpectedly at the age of 110. You know, no one saw it coming. And but when you watch her, she's just full of vibrancy and life and love of life and appreciation and gratitude. And she had that same attitude throughout the horror. Now, which is only to say, and my best guess is, that she was even given some God-given grace, some experience of divinity or reality at some point, or more likely, she had an amazing first 3 years of life. You know, she was thereafter, as you said, inoculated, even against that horror of that. There's not a more wounding environment than what she went through. So which only goes to show what the human potential actually is.
People have what seems to be caring behavior. People give to charity, they volunteer in the downtown east side. What to you is, what are you after here when you're talking about a child who's caring?
Well, first of all, caring is an emotion. If you have caring behavior that doesn't have the heat of that emotion, that you're not moved to care, it can actually be a travesty. And that's one of the problems, is when you reinforce caring for an individual, and they're doing it for the reinforcement. Is it caring anymore? Isn't that not what we call hypocrisy or narcissism or selfishness? And that's one of the problems. So that if you actually try to say, okay, that was a caring act, I'm going to reinforce you for that, and now I do it so that I can get the prize, the diploma, that one would be hard-pressed to define it that way. So first of all, we can't operationally define this. There's certain things you cannot operationally define in terms of actions, because there must be some integrity to it. And so the emotion of caring, we're moved to care for, to care about, to take care of. And it turns out that all mammals care, and we care about it. It really is a function of attachments. We care about what we are attached to. We care for whom we're attached to. To care about is to be attached to, and it's the preeminent, in a sense, need that we have of this togetherness. And caring is linked to that. It is almost synonymous with it.
And the affective neuroscientist Jack Panksepp, who's just a brilliant researcher, he works with animals, and he's actually based in Washington State now, but he's one of the world stars of emotional research. He distinguishes 7 primary brain emotional systems, of which caring is one of them. And this is in the same brain substrate for caring. He identifies them across all mammals, so that it's actually a primary drive. The question, I suppose, is just because it's there biologically doesn't mean it'll be culturally expressed. So what are the cultivating factors then that will allow that caring system to come into fruition, and what, on the other hand, will inhibit it from developing?
One of the things that you just said, Gordon, is that if we reinforce it, that we won't necessarily reinforce that feeling. I have to understand that more. What do you mean?
Well,
what do we do
emotions happen
what does
to
it
us.
look
We're
like?
stirred up. We're moved to care. If we would ask, what is it that moved that child to care instead of clapping for the caring behavior? Just like curiosity, if you actually reinforce curiosity, you make it go away. When it comes to emotion, you want to ask, what were the antecedents? What led to this? What were the conditions that did this? One of those conditions, very interestingly for us, is part and parcel of the attachment. Is a whole set of what we would call alpha instincts, which really are part of, again, all mammal attachment instincts, and it's to care for our offspring, to care for those in need, to care for those who show vulnerability. And this is what we often define as empathy, but it actually is part of that whole attachment family of instincts.
Every time I give a public talk, I never fail to mention this, and I think it's really worth noticing the very phrase acting out. When we talk about kids who are acting out, it always means that they're doing something bad. But if you actually understand the phrase has an English meaning. It is a very specific meaning. You act something out when you don't have words to say it in language. So that in a country where in a game of charades, for example, you're not allowed to speak, so you have to act out. The message has to be behavioral because it can't be verbal. So if we actually understood that children's acting out is in every case a message to do with the failure of the hierarchy to take care of them, then instead of punishing them for those behaviors, we would actually take care of them. Put them, as Gordon says, really put them in their place. And not in a punitive sense, but in the sense of in the place in the hierarchy. Then those behaviors would stop.
Could we pick it up after the first 3 years then? Because you've both said that those first 3 years are foundational, but that we know more now that you know from your experience that people have chances after that and that they do turn their lives around. We've all seen it. So I think maybe it'd be great to stay with that for a bit about what are the things that we can all do to make sure that if it didn't happen in the first 3 years, that we can create optimal circumstances to make sure that it happens after that.
Well, I'm going to go to another piece of the puzzle for cultivating caring children. And that caring as an emotion is absolutely essential. It's an essential ingredient. If you don't have it, you're not going to have empathy, compassion, and so on. It's the essential ingredient. And that is there. But you can have a child who cares very deeply and is completely inconsiderate. And so caring, compassion, and being able to consider the needs of others at the same time as your own, that capacity has to be developed. And that is the job of the prefrontal cortex of the brain. But very interesting to this, very interesting is that the brain doesn't work it doesn't make somebody nice by taking away their meanness. It doesn't make somebody patient by taking away their frustration. It doesn't make somebody courageous by taking away their fear. The brain's way of doing this, the secret of the prefrontal cortex, it's really the mixing bowl of emotion. It's fed by the amygdala, the command center of the limbic system. About 5 years of age, it starts feeding two feelings at once. Now, first of all, you have to have your feelings, and caring is the ultimate mixer for us. But if I can experience, if a 5-year-old can feel both his hugs and his hits for his sister, still, he has a sister, and sisters are frustrating. Which one of us with a sister doesn't get frustrated?
Not as much as brothers are frustrated.
And who of us hasn't had our hits in us for our sister, even if it's just verbal hits or whatever it is? But if we remember we have our hugs in us too, that is the start and the place of civilized behavior is, on the other hand, double feelings. And so nature's answer is very much different the way we are. We're a cut-it-out society. Don't be mean. Don't be rude. Don't be selfish. Don't be this. Stop hitting. Stop doing this. We're always saying cut it out. Nature's answer is not cutting it out. It is, and this too. On the other hand, there is something else to consider. I'm very nervous about this, but I'm excited as well. I don't like it when she bosses me around, but I want to play with her. And so we've got those double feelings. And that consideration, when you add that capacity to caring, is where we start realizing our full human potential as compassionate, empathic human beings. But there's a two-part recipe. The emotion, the caring, and the capacity. And, interesting enough, how is that capacity built? By being able to have all our feelings again.
When I had kids 30 years ago, the word attachment really was starting to surface, and it seemed like a pretty magical kind of a thing that happened between usually a mother and a child.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you did that right, your child would be inoculated for life. So that's really what we believed. And I'm not sure what attachment was. I'm not sure that I did it right. I was always worried that I didn't quite do it right, you know. So what do we know about attachment now, and how does attachment to a parent fit into what you're describing as a wounded world?
Well, we all know what constitutes a wound, I think, with our loved ones. When we don't see the invitation to exist in their presence, in their eyes. Now you can imagine a child who lives with not having any confidence of the invitation to exist. They've been born in this, but are they invited to exist in the mother's presence, in the father's presence, in the big brother's presence, and all of this? Is that invitation there? If it's not, it constitutes a wound. Now you just continue that. If kids become attached to their peers, heaven help them. Because the more they matter, the more hurt they are by all the wounds they see, the lack of invitation, the conditions on that invitation. And so you can see very much how children, if children were raised in a village of attachment where they could look in their grandma's eyes, in their parents' eyes, and see this, it was safe. They weren't getting hurt. There are many ways you get hurt, bumps and bruises, but at least psychologically there was a sense of safety. And now you just change the children being attached to their peers. And again, what we talk about in Hold On to Your Kids, it just ups the ante. It's a wounding environment. In that environment, we should not be surprised to realize children are losing their empathy, their caring. And so we think that is something they haven't learned. But no, it's something that they've actually lost. The brain has its reasons. It needs to equip for a wounding environment. You can't to care is to set yourself up for disappointment. But it's a result of our children losing their tender feelings.
Yeah, in some ways you think that if they have been vulnerable themselves, they would appreciate and see vulnerability in others. And
No. Everybody's vulnerable. You're born vulnerable. You can't help be vulnerable. Vulnerare, the Latin word to be wounded. So we're all woundable. That's just our nature as human beings, from conception till death. So it's not a question of whether you were vulnerable or not. It's a question of whether your vulnerability was respected or not, whether it was protected or not, whether it was looked after or not. Because if you're wounded in your vulnerability, then one of the ways you'll respond is to actually shut down. And then you're not vulnerable, but you're also not compassionate. So the lack of compassion is always a repressed hurt, a hurt in your vulnerability. I had a really funny incident that some of you may have heard, I talked about it once before publicly, happened last summer. In 2006, I wrote an article for the GaborMate on fervorization. And fervorization is a technique where you basically deliberately don't pick up a child when they cry at night. Mm-hmm. The idea is that way they'll learn to go back to sleep. If you don't pick them up, after 2 or 3 nights of not picking them up, they'll sleep through the night, which is true, they will. And I used to advocate this as a physician, practice as a parent, and then at some point, and partially under Gordon's influence, I came to the conclusion that this was wrong, that actually what we're doing here is we're giving kids the wrong lesson, wrong message. Not only that, we also learned a lot these days about brain development, and that we know how these early experiences are actually programmed into the brain, so that if you don't pick up a kid crying at night, and by the way, this is the culture doing this. This is not even parents. This is the culture telling parents to do this, and this has been going on for a good 70 years now. Blessed Dr. Spock for all the fact that he had a lot of good things to say. He actually talked about the tyranny of the baby who wants to be picked up at night. The tyranny of the baby. Get that phrase, you know. So, and his idea was, you know, not to pick up kids. My mother-in-law, who's now 89, remembers just her heart being torn apart, but the doctors had told her not to pick up that baby, wounding that baby's vulnerability. Anyway, so I wrote this article in 2006 for the Globe, pointing out that, apart from other things, this kind of treatment of an infant will model in the child's cortex a world that doesn't care. Well, for some reason, the article reappeared in the Globe's website last summer. I mean, 7 or 8 years after it originally appeared, and within a week, it had been shared 67,000 times. I don't know by what process or how or who, but anyway, there it was. And so it drew a lot of new commentary. One of which was from somebody who said, this article is prefrontal lobe BS. He said, there's no way that those early experiences are programmed in the child's brain. If that were the case, then the last 3 generations to lead the world, including the boomers and the post-boomers and the Generation X, would all be screwed up and have psychological problems. And I thought I'd rest my case.
So here we are, talking about attachment, about caring, about what it actually means to raise a child in a world that doesn't always make space for tenderness. And honestly, it's kind of overwhelming. Because for so long, we thought if we just loved our kids enough, if we did it right, they'd be okay. Safe. Shielded from whatever storms life had in store. But now we know it's not that simple. Love isn't just about being there. It's about what a child sees in your eyes. It's about the unspoken invitation that says, you exist, and I'm glad you do. And when that invitation isn't there, when a child doesn't feel seen, doesn't feel safe in the presence of the people who are supposed to protect them, that's a wound. And wounds, when left untended, don't just heal themselves. They harden. And suddenly we have children, entire generations, who've lost something vital. Not because they never had it, but because they had it and then had to let it go. Because to care in a world that doesn't make space for vulnerability, that's too much to bear. So the brain steps in, does what it was designed to do, protect. It shuts down the soft parts, turns off the feelings. And without feelings, what happens? Empathy fades, compassion weakens, and we find ourselves looking at kids who don't seem to care. Not realizing they did care. They just had to stop. And here's the real kicker, the culture encourages this. It tells parents to ignore the cries, to let the baby self-soothe. It tells kids to toughen up, be independent, stop being so sensitive. And then we act surprised when those same kids grow up detached, disconnected, when they struggle to love, to trust, to feel. But here's what gives me hope. The fact that people are starting to see it. The fact that, even after decades of doing things one way, we're waking up and realizing, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe attachment isn't just some sentimental thing between a mother and child. Maybe it's the foundation of everything. Maybe it's the difference between a world that raises kids who are whole and a world that keeps breaking them down. And if that's true, then we have work to do. Not just in how we parent, but in how we see each other. In how we make space for vulnerability, for tenderness, for emotions that don't always fit neatly into our fast-paced, efficiency-obsessed world. We have to stop asking, how do we fix these kids? And start asking, how do we help them feel safe enough to stay soft? Because caring isn't something we teach. It's something we protect. And maybe, just maybe, it's not too late to start.